Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So I believe we have started. Yep, we're live. Thank you for joining us. If you are on, I'm Samah, and tonight we are very fortunate enough to have Professor Mohamad Abdalla, Dr. Nadeem Mimon, and Brother Dylan Chown to launch a unique group known as the Islamic School Educators. Before we get started, before we get started with the interview, I would like to state the purpose of this group, and that is to build a global community of people who are committed to becoming better Islamic school educators. I'd like to also introduce our guest speakers very briefly, even though I'm sure most of you know of them. They are currently all part of the Center of Islamic Thought and Education, or CITE for short, through the University of South Australia. Professor Mohamad Abdalla is the Centre Director and is one of Australia's most prominent and respected Muslim leaders. Dr. Nadeem Mimon is a Senior Research Fellow at CITE and is currently focusing on teaching education with particular emphasis on Islamic pedagogy and culturally relevant and responsive teaching. And Brother Dylan Chown is also a research fellow at CITE and coordinates courses in the Islamic pedagogy specialization within the Master of Teaching and the Graduate Diploma in Islamic Education. How are you all?
Excellent, thank you. And yourself?
Alhamdulillah, very well.
Alhamdulillah. Professor Mohamad Abdalla, could we start with you, and can you please explain to us the role of a teacher from an Islamic perspective?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for the question. From an Islamic perspective, a teacher plays a significant role. In fact, religiously speaking, teaching, the profession of teaching, is very much intertwined and linked with the revelation itself. In fact, all the prophets and the messengers of God were themselves teachers. In a beautiful hadith narrated by Ibn Majah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, says, "Innama ursiltu mu'allima." I have been sent, in fact, as a teacher. Historically, also, and interestingly, in fact, teachers held the highest positions in Islamic societies, and incidentally, they were paid the highest salaries in historically, and so there is a very close relationship between teaching and the very message of Islam, in fact, and that is why scholars say the first revelations of the Quran, Iqra, which were followed also by in the same verses that he who taught that by the use of the pen. These themselves are the instruments of teaching. And a teacher plays a significant role, not only because he or she transmits knowledge, but more importantly, from an Islamic perspective, a worldview, they nurture the child holistically. They nurture the student or the learner spiritually, academically, intellectually, psychologically, and so forth. And therefore, really, a teacher holds a pivotal role in the Islamic narrative and in the Islamic history of civilization.
SubhanAllah, thank you very much. So, Dr. Nadeem, could you please add on to that by discussing what the overall vision is for Islamic schools globally, because that's what you've focused on. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Maybe we lost him.
Maybe. Yeah, I think he's
but if I could say a few more words there while we get Nadeem back, perhaps, if you would like.
Yes.
Yeah, good, just to keep us going. I mean, the essence of being a teacher was beautifully summed up by a contemporary poet, an Egyptian poet by the name of Ahmad Shawqi. And in a couplet, he beautifully summed up perhaps the very purpose of teaching and teachers, where he said, قم للمعلم وفه التبجيل كاد المعلم أن يكون رسولا أعلمت أشرف أو أجل من الذي يبني وينشئ أنفسا وعقولا. Meaning or less, it says, stand up for the teacher and honor his or her rank. For a teacher is almost as a messenger. Do you know of someone nobler than he or she who nurtures minds and hearts? And really you can see that how beautifully that couplet sums up the very essence of teaching and teachers from an Islamic perspective. It is somebody who nurtures minds and nurtures the intellect, it nurtures the hearts. And it's really therefore more than just transmitting of information, it's the transformation of the learner that is at the heart of the teaching profession from an Islamic perspective.
Okay, so you've mentioned also the purpose of education. So that would be the transformation. Yep.
Exactly, in a sense. I mean, there'll be a lot of narratives as to the purpose of education, but one could sum it up by saying it is to gain cognizance of God or knowing or the ma'rifah, but also it is the transformation of the learner in a positive sense, of course.
Good. So I think a lot of us don't come from Islamic schooling environments. Some of us homeschool, others teach at state schools. And I believe we can still share that purpose within education and our role as educators, no matter what environment we are currently in. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, teaching happens everywhere, and that some of the best teachers are parents, in fact. So teaching takes place in the house, it takes place in a context, an education context. Labels are not necessary here. You know, you can call it a madrasa, you can call it a school, you can call it whatever, but it is the foundational aspects of the process of teaching and the process of learning that is so important. Historically, in Islamic civilization, they would often give their students to what they call a murabbi, a teacher who would nurture the child. And that murabbi was not necessarily in a particular schooling context as we understand it today, but had the skills and the expertise to be able to nurture the student or the learner in this case.
Thank you, Professor.
Pleasure.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Nadeem.
Walaikum salam. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good.
Okay. So I was wondering if you could share with us the overall vision that Islamic schools have.
Sure. So I think it's important to acknowledge that Islamic schools have a relatively short history. We're still in our infancy as faith-based schools in comparison to our brothers and sisters as Jewish and Christian schools, whose history is 150 years and beyond. Our history across most Western contexts, like the UK, like the US, Australia, and Canada, and other places, is anywhere between 30 to 35 years. And many of our schools have started in around the same time in the early 1980s. But in that short amount of time, I think we've had some significant achievements. And I think it's important to acknowledge that to this date, we now have across these Western contexts anywhere between 3 to 13% of Muslim students, Muslim school-age students, that are now supporting and attending Islamic faith-based schools, which is showing a sense of traction from the larger Muslim communities and populations. At the same time, I think one of the major achievements we've had is we've now started to focus on issues of curriculum integration, supporting student learner identities, and the concept of living Islam in practice. When we first started Islamic schools, the focus was a lot on content, passing on content, or just teaching Islam. But the shift, I think, that's taken place in the past decade or slightly more has been around how do we live Islam? How do we be Muslim? How do we showcase, not necessarily showcase, but how do we interact with people in a way that is of the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And that's been a shift in not just in how we then teach, but also how we learn and engage with students. And I think one of the other major achievements that speaks to the vision of schools overall is that now we have an emerging sense of varied educational visions. Prior to, when in the early days of Islamic schools, we saw Islamic schools as one and uniform. And now we're beginning to acknowledge that Islamic schools are distinct. Some focus on academic excellence, others focus on social activism, others try to establish really strong character education programs. And you've even got the rise of what we call Islamic Montessori schools. And to me, that showcases a need to combine unique visions of contemporary schooling with perspectives that are rooted in the Islamic tradition. So we've got some significant achievements that have been shaping the current vision of our schools and the way that we now conceptualize our vision. And I think when you think about the challenges, there's still some very significant foundational challenges that remain as well. I should say, aside from the work of SITE to establish a teacher education program or a master's and a graduate diploma in education, there are few and far between leadership and teacher education programs that help educators conceptualize what this vision could be of Islamic schools. One of the common challenges I think that most schools would probably agree to is that we still do not have a curriculum learning map that defines how and where Islam can be integrated or infused or authentically brought in to the curriculum that we teach in our own contexts. And there are still within our community and outside of our communities, internal and external negative perceptions about what Islamic schools are and can be. This gets me to our vision, the question that you asked, because the vision is important. And I think the way that vision has evolved over the last 30 to 35 years, between the achievements and the challenges, is now we begin to look at the vision. I think I can speak on behalf of the many schools that I've worked with. The vision is really defined by excellence. There's a stronger, I think, push for ihsan, excellence not just academically, but excellence in character, excellence in learning, excellence in retracing the history and the lived tradition that Professor Mohamad mentioned, that comes from within the Islamic tradition, to relive and bring back in ways that are contextually relevant this tradition of excellence in learning and teaching. So I think the vision that we're heading towards is looking at a holistic conceptualization of what excellence and ihsan are in our curriculum, in our school environments, in our character education, in how we, as I mentioned earlier, live Islam.
Thank you for sharing that. As you've mentioned, this is still very new, and as a student of the postgraduate course, I wasn't aware that we could have the ability to integrate or to infuse Islamic worldview within our curriculum. And I'm sure a lot of us out there are unaware of this. So it's good that we are becoming aware, and inshallah, with further practice, then we can have success in that. I know that you've interviewed and you've studied different worldviews within schooling, the Catholic schooling system, the Jewish schooling system, and those two schooling systems have been in place a lot longer than us. And so you've seen them go through similar steps that we're headed towards in terms of integration. Did you want to mention something about that?
Sure. I mean, I think the point to be taken is that there's a lot that we can learn from other faith-based schooling communities. I think we're on a similar trajectory as they are to develop schools that authentically teach faith in a way that is lived and that is transformative, and not in a way that faith becomes dogmatic and simply passes on knowledge It's more about how do we use that knowledge, how do we live that knowledge. And I think what we've seen in other faith-based schools is a recognition that there are many different ways of looking at curriculum and curriculum integration. And that acknowledgement, I think, is something that we need Islamic schools to also begin to consider. That you can't, curriculum integration is not, we don't all have the same understanding of curriculum integration. And that's a broader conversation. But I think the first step is to acknowledge that there are diverse ways of looking at integration, what that means and what that can look like.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nadeem. Brother Dylan, having listened to Dr. Nadeem and Professor Mohamad Abdalla, what would the importance of this group be, and how can this group help us achieve that goal? And where are we headed?
Bismillah. Thank you very much. And I guess platforming from what my esteemed colleagues have spoken about, we believe that this group is a game changer, bi'ithnillah, because it responds to that gap in the field that Dr. Nadeem mentioned in relation to teacher education, to induction programs, to ongoing professional learning. And perhaps many of the viewers have experienced what many of us have come to realise, that the support of our educators, be it in preparation, teacher preparation, or be it in that ongoing capacity, has been a neglected area in the field. For some of us to attend professional learning when we're working in a classroom or in an Islamic school, it's not as feasible as it sounds. Often for us to leave our students for a day means relying on a colleague or a staff member to cover our class or cover our students. Sometimes being away can complicate things for us, and it's easier to remain with our learners. Also, perhaps some Islamic schools lack the capacity to offer robust and ongoing professional learning. Each Islamic school operates the best it can. Perhaps as a field, we haven't till now been able to provide a platform that can reach so many. The other thing that comes to mind as being someone who's been in an Islamic school classroom, that those of us that do have access either to individual tailored professional learning or whole staff type professional learning, often it's very normative, it's very general. And sometimes it draws from perhaps a standardisation type agenda that we see prevailing in Western contexts broadly, not only in Islamic schools, but broadly. And sometimes that runs contrary, or certainly perhaps drowns out some of the higher hearing from Professor Abdalla and Dr. Nadeem. Now, that can be exhausting because we've got to understand that professional learning and often translate it and sort of convert it into our own schooling contexts and the needs of our own Muslim learners. But to have what this is, bringing educators together in a global community and to all-important professional learning, and to filling that gap that we've mentioned. And what let's talk about is that professional learning that either is separate, i.e. the faith, the Islamic, if you like, in the Islamic school that runs our academic aims, or contrary to our academic aims, or it has proved to be problematic. For many of us in the field, rather we see a much more integrated vision for an aspect. Now, we can, from our travels nationally, confidently say that there are so many committed educators of Muslim learners. We know that there are, and I'll invoke the words of a common heroes in each Islamic school, many talented educators very hard. And as we know, research again and again talks being a key actor in this, in education of our learners. And we would invoke from our tradition that where people in the past, but it's of course whom they study. So this global community of Islamic means that we get to nurture each other, nurture our professional identities. So ultimately, so that can translate to the type of nurturing Professor Abdalla opened this session with. Now, there are ways that we envisage that you, Islamic schools, with this group, your group. Firstly, one of the sessions we have is a weekly inspirational post. And this is your fill my cup up moment. This is my recharge. It's a 3 or 4 minute post, a reminder of why we love what we do, but sometimes it's the day-to-day. Sometimes it's stuff. It's the extra things that come as being an educational context that can perhaps be like weight on our shoulders. So inspirational post is a chance to feed, that educators very often risk being the candle that gives out light, but then burning out themselves. So this doesn't necessarily access from the comfort of your phone or device, reminder, and that will be Monday, Facebook group. The second way which we is through live Facebook sessions. Similar to this active. These would be 30-minute sessions with ideas in our field to connect one and all with the thought leader globally and the trends that are pervading our. This is more of an opportunity to interact, to engage, and as thought leaders perhaps we wouldn't ordinarily have access to. Questions, the questions that relate to our context, to our learners. Maybe miss the session because educators are busy people. You can on this reconnect at a time that's convenient for you. And perhaps someone else has asked an urgent question that you had. Perhaps there's the idea that each teacher needs to have in their toolbox that they can perhaps adapt to their own context. Other things. In regard to the Facebook sessions, just while I'm here, I'd like to promote the first Facebook session, which will be this Friday, the 6th of September, which is none other than Ms Ainur Simmersall. Ms Ainur is Thursday night. And check the platforms because we're global. If you check the platforms and the time zone that comes to you. And herself, she was an executive school here in Australia. She's the current chair of the Islamic Schooling Association of Australia, and currently an executive officer in Independent Schooling Victoria, which takes care of all independent schools across the state of Victoria. So she is one of those gems, one of those heroes, one of those very talented educators, and her session is about growing your educators. So this is a don't miss. This is on Thursday night. Now, this Facebook group, as we get to know each other better and as we get to understand those exponential challenges that each educator faces in their own school context, and we get to know the needs and the interests better, we intend to expand this content beyond the weekly inspirational posts, beyond these Facebook interactive 30-minute sessions. Some examples coming in a month's time are sessions on innovative practice, where educators can come and borrow from other educators. Some of the sessions proposed, what does a sacred learning environment look like? We often talk about classroom ecologies, and we talk about how do we create that learning environment that imbues the values and the aims that we like to see, as well as being functional. Classroom needs to be functional. What does civic engagement look like? Many of us in Islamic education understand this notion of vicegerency, of being Allah's representative, being his custodian, and all of the things that can invoke, and how that might intersect with notions of citizenship, which is very, very important, of course, in the contemporary context. What does parent engagement look like? It's very important that we engage with our parents as critical stakeholders. So these are some of the sessions. And just finally, I'll borrow a little bit of time here, some gritty questions. This is our opportunity to take that deep dive and indulge in some critical analysis of contemporary issues. We don't want to be responsive. We don't want to be in a position of being reactionary. We want to be on top of these contemporary vexing questions that perhaps are shared across the field, shared across contexts, or unique, but we get to float them in a platform where there's those diversity of perspectives. And of course, we get to draw from unity in diversity, which is a beautiful characteristic of both Islam and, of course, Islamic education. So we know when we share practice, everyone benefits. And I hope this is exciting, that this is an effort to really get behind and support the heart of Islamic schools, which is, of course, the educators. So we look forward to getting to know each and every one of you so that we can facilitate this. Look out for school profiles and educator profiles. We get to see about our contemporaries and our colleagues in different places around the world, and they're in our shared effort to educate our learners. So I hope this has whet the appetite. I hope that we hope, I should say, this is a shared aim and a shared collective effort, that this becomes an indispensable tool in the toolkit that every educator needs. So I hope that has everybody ready for engagement, for interaction, and for shared benefit.
Thank you, Brother Dylan. A lot of us are very excited because of how accessible this group is and the content that will be put forth, inshallah. So we're very much looking forward to it. I'd like to thank each one of you for taking the time out tonight, or all of you are here in Australia. Any last words before we end this session?
It's very exciting. I think it's an exciting moment in our history, really, to contemporary history of Islamic schooling and education, to create a hub, an international hub of not only academics but practitioners also, people who have concern and aspirations and visions for renewal of Islamic schools and education. I think this is a momentous occasion, and certainly will bring so much positive and a lot of productivity, inshallah ta'ala. So looking forward to it. It's quite exciting.
Okay, thank you.
My final word, I guess, is a reminder to myself, and of course, a reminder to my esteemed colleagues around the world. We see as educators, we're often reminded that we're reflective practitioners, and we understand the importance of our professional roles in engaging in reflective practice. This, of course, is tangent to what's something so critical to our Islamic tradition, which is that notion of muhasabah, that self-examination, and that muraqabah, which inshallah can lead to that ma'ifah that Professor Abdalla invoked so beautifully. So I remind myself and I remind my colleagues that this platform is a chance for our personal and our professional growth. And I look forward to taking that journey with all of you, inshallah. Thank you very much for your time this evening or this morning.
Thank you all. Okay. Assalamu alaikum all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khairan.